Good morning. This is Avraham Shira from Nar Shalom with our Shabbos talk with the Baal Shem Tov. You know, when we learn the works of these great rabbis, we are entering their minds. And you don't have to enter their little old house in Medzebush or their synagogue to enter their mind. We need to enter their Torah because that's where it's all happening. So it's an important kavanah to understand that when we learn the works of the rabbis, we are entering their mind. And when you read any book, the mind of the author is entering us as well. And that symbiology of mental transition is very important. Today we're going to talk about the extra Shabbos Soul, Neshama Yetera it's called, the soul of the Shabbos. And the Baal Shem Tov is going to start us off with the secret and then mention some ideas we learned last week about the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. Okay. The Gamsora Neshama Yetera, the secret of the extra soul, as our sages taught, Al Yismach Moshe b'Matan Helko. When the verse says that Moses rejoiced in his portion, he was talking about his soul. Now that seems to be the highest level of self-esteem a person can have. That he's happy to be himself. At the highest level. And not because I'm leader of the nation or the prophet who's leading these people through the desert, or I have the broken tablets in my backpack. Because of Moses' rejoicing in his own portion. King David says the same thing, Barchi Nafshi. My blessing is my soul. Bless me, my soul. So this is an important shift we need to make if we want to get closer to Hashem, is to have appreciation for who we are. Now, the secret of this Matanat Helko, the gift of his portion, Shenotnim lo b'matana b'chol Shabbat elef halkei ha'or, and the extra special gift that Moshe received was the 1,000 lights that he receives every Friday afternoon. Well, Moses has been dead a few years, but the kabbalah of the Arizal teaches us that these 1,000 lights were actually the souls that the Jews lost when they made the golden calf. Now, this is a difficult thing a bit to think about. That essentially 3,000 Erev Ravians and a few Jews, I guess, mixed in, made the golden calf and caused the whole nation to fall from its pristine level of Adam before the sin, which is the level of Gan Eden, which is the level of perfect memory. It is the level of seeing the world through the eyes of Hashem. They lost that with the golden calf. They looked at the golden calf, they danced, they played music, they did a few other things we're not going to mention. And they lost that special soul. Where did it go? It went back where it came from. Like everything in spirituality. It has a root and it has an expression. A branch, a leaf, a flower, if you will. Well, the flower of all those Shabbos souls that were lost went back to the root soul, which is Moses. Because Moses was the tzaddik ador. And this is the pyramid of soul structure that it exists forever. From generation to generation, the pyramid changes with the people in it. But the tzaddik ador is always at the top of the pyramid. And we're down here somewhere in the middle, let's say. Maybe even at the bottom. But that soul, that Shabbos soul that they lost, went all back to the top, to the root. And so it went back to Moses, and then every Friday afternoon, he gets them again. Now, what happens if we keep Shabbat, we get a piece of that back. That Shabbos soul that was lost from our root souls, because remember, we're living on a very long vine, a very long grapevine that's 3,500 years long, of soul, branch, root, branch, all the way up. And people who keep Shabbat properly with the right intention, the right heart, They learn, they pray, they love their fellow Jews, they thank God for their portion. Matanat chelko barchi nafshi. They're going to feel and sense that special Shabbos soul. And if I've got complaints with myself, with my family, with my Creator, then there's less chance I'm going to feel that satisfaction, what we call ta'anug, which is pleasure, a high level of pleasure, and svia, or satisfaction, being filled with what you have. Okay, we'll talk more about that. So this Shabbos soul all comes back to Moses after the sin, and then it comes back every week. We get a little spark of it. That's called the Shabbos Crown, by the way, that was taken at the head of Egel. And because of this neshama yetera al yedei zeh, the Baal Shem Tov says, Ki eved ne'eman karata lo, he is called a faithful servant. Why? L'achzir Yisrael otanam ketarim, because he gives us back those lost crowns every week. And Eved Ne'eman, it's a beautiful idea. In other words, Moses could say, no, I'm not giving you your soul. Can you imagine? But he's Ne'eman, he's faithful. He's going to give back our Shabbos soul to us every week. Now, if I decide, I can't keep Shabbos anymore, that's too hard. I have to drive to the gym. I have to smoke a cigarette. Whatever it is that a person is tested by on Shabbat, he's making a pretty expensive business deal, trading off a cigarette for his Shabbos soul. Now in Breslov, I've heard the story, about the guy who wanted to smoke on Shabbos, and a Breslover told him, okay, smoke your cigarette, but keep the rest of Shabbat. So the actual smoking is the Averah, the cigarette on Shabbat, but the rest of the Shabbat you could keep. And the story goes that after a year, he saw the fellow again, and he wasn't smoking on Shabbat anymore, because he felt the difference. And that's the key. If I don't feel the difference, what am I doing? What did I sign up for? But Shabbat, we're going to learn more about it as we go. This crown that Moses returns every week. And these are still, they were taken from them by the golden calf. He repeats the idea. Right, and this is the idea of the inclusion of Tiferet. Now, we're going to explain this according to the Kabbalah as well. Barosho. Now, Tiferet is the Shira, the soul power of the heart. Okay? And it is considered the center of the tree of life. Not the mind, the heart is the center of the tree of life. However, listen to the Pesuk closely. Klil Tiferet, the inclusive Tiferet, which means all of these Shabbos crowns, these extra pieces of soul, these new softwares you get every Shabbat, these downloads from heaven of pleasure and satisfaction, they're included in the idea of Tiferet. But where are they by Moses? Asher berosho natatalo. There by Moses' head. Why? Because he's the root soul of the generation, and then that flows down to the heart, and then we spread out from the heart of Moses. Because there's a structure involved here. In Kabbalah, it's called Zer Anpin, and the final receiver of this soul power, of course, is the Malchut, the kingship, which is called Nukba, the feminine form. So see how it works. All the souls are included in the heart of Moses. It goes up to his head, and then every Shabbat they come back down to the heart, and we get a little spark of that crown. But it's starting at the crown of Moses. You have to ask yourself, how did the Arizal figure out these things? Even if you had a high experience and you felt the lights moving from your head to your heart, back to your head, how? Well, because Eliyahu Navi told him these things and taught him face to face. And this is how the Kabbalah is always renewed. And the Baal Shem Tov had his teacher, Achia Shiloni, who was a prophet from the time of Moses. Now, if that's hard to believe, you're right. It is hard to believe. But when you believe that the soul doesn't die, then you understand that it can go anywhere, anytime. And these great souls came to teach the great souls of each generation. Okay. And now we're going to understand something beautiful. Al pasuk Shabbat vayi nafash, kevan sheshavat avda nefesh. When a person rests or sits, so to speak, there's a loss of soul. Perush, the rabbi says, Ashir margish yoter metzar ani yoter mina anish todato. Right? We had this idea last week that a person who's wealthy, who loses his wealth, feels the pain of the loss more than a person who was never wealthy. And that's a metaphor for the Shabbat soul of the tzaddik, who he feels the wealth of Shabbat, and so Saturday night, Motzi Shabbat, he feels the loss of the Shabbos soul, leaving him. Because he was ashir, he was wealthy with the Shabbat light. Whereas a person who never had Shabbat, he's not going to necessarily feel that loss on Saturday night. So that distinction is important. But look at the verse, Shavat vayinafash. This is what we say in praise of Shabbat. We rested, we sat down, we took it easy on Shabbat, vayinafash. Now what is that word? Well, nefesh, of course, is one level of the soul. It's the exterior level of the soul. It's the soul that operates your organs. It's the soul that illuminates your skin. And the sense of touch is very connected to soul. Whereas ruach is the sense of feeling, the sense of breath. And neshama, of course, is thought and contemplation aspect of the soul. But this vayinafash, we take the word nefesh, which is a noun for soul, and we turn it into a verb. Now, isn't that interesting? What does that mean? We turn a noun into a verb. That we take the soul, a thing, a spiritual thing, it's a power pack, and we make it into an action. Vayinafash. You spread out your soul. It's called pizor in Hebrew. The soul goes into a new state of being on Shabbat. Because the nefesh is working all week long. You know, when you run to the shul, and then you run to work, and then you run to to the gym, whatever you do, you're running, right? Hopefully not. But all of that is nefesh. And when we stop running, guess what? The nefesh gets to rest. Shavat vayinafash. And that resting is like an introduction to a new level of pleasure that you can't have when you're running around during the weekday. You can't have that type of pleasure when you're on, the BQE driving into Manhattan every day. Now, if you tell me you can, well, we'll have to talk about it. Maybe you're getting some extra help. There is the concept of dragging Shabbat into the weekdays, and that's really a discussion unto itself. But that is something that people on a high level can do. By certain mitzvah that we do during the week, we can actually pull Shabbat into the weekdays. So maybe you can chill out on the BQE in a traffic jam too. If anybody doesn't know, BQE is Brooklyn Queens Expressway, one of those wonderful roads that humanity is, it's one of the main arteries between the city and Long Island. Nonetheless, I was there a few times. I'm glad I'm just driving here Highway 60 between Jerusalem and Gush Etzion. That's enough of a highway for me. These arteries of life, just like our bodies have arteries with blood cells running through them, so too the human race is running down the highways of the world. Okay. And so the Rav goes on and repeats the idea that we had before, that the person feels on the loss of his extra soul on Motzi Shabbat more than a regular person who doesn't keep the Shabbat or tries to keep the Shabbat but doesn't get the pleasure out of it. Now, this is a big klal in Torah and in mitzvot, that if I'm doing the mitzvah but I'm not getting pleasure out of it, I need to ask myself, why not? What am I doing? Now, most people will just blame God, or they'll blame the minyan, or they'll blame their rabbi, or they'll blame their wife, or they'll find someone to blame. This is the ched of Adam Rishon, was to blame his wife. And the ched of Hava was to blame the snake. And the head of the snake was to make the test too hard. But everybody's blaming somebody else, and this is what we got to stop this. We got to take responsibility, because that's a divine act, to take responsibility. And to say, you're right, I'm sorry. That's all you got to do. That's it. Because everybody has a spark of right and a spark of a mistake in these types of things. But nonetheless, the ikar of the tanug of the tzaddik, the person who's really on the level of getting the pleasure in serving Hashem, that it's not onus, it's not a hard work. It can be hard, but you're working hard for a pleasure. When you lift those weights, you're working for the release of endorphins, or you run, or you work, you go to your job, you work to see that bank account go up. That's pleasure too. But here, it's a different pleasure. What is the difference between all the different pleasures in the world? We learned last week that there's many pleasures that we have that once it's over, it's over. After you finish chewing that last bite of whatever you love to eat, it's gone. Now you feel satisfaction after. But let's say your favorite food is, salmon with sauce béarnaise and a little lemon and dill on top. And you eat that salmon. You're experiencing the pleasure of the taste of salmon, which has a spark of God in it, by the way. It's not, the spark of God that's in the salmon is not the salmon. It's that illuminating, powerful soul of the fish, right? Has the spark of God in it. That's what the real pleasure is. Now, after you finish eating, it's gone. The next stage is called svi'ah, satisfaction. That's also a form of pleasure. The satisfaction is, what a good meal. But that that's connected to what we just said, the vayinafash. That your soul is resting now. It's no longer in pursuit of food. And so too, when you get the paycheck in your mail or on your, in digital form. The check came in. Now I can pay my bills. Now I can buy my new car, or whatever you're going after. I don't know. Okay, so there's stages in pleasure. Now you think back to the last time you had salmon and you say, there's no pleasure left in it for you. You remember that you had pleasure, but you're not actually experiencing the pleasure of that item. Whereas Torah and tefillah, it's not the same. That you can remember that first time you opened up Pirkei Avot and you're like, wow, I really identify with what that rabbi said. And you open that Pirkei Avot 20 years later and you read that verse and you will get that pleasure again. It's not a piece of salmon. It's a piece of divine light. And that's the sign of divine pleasure, that it comes back again and again. And remember the first time you prayed to God with your heart open, and you maybe shed a tear or 2 or 500. You can go back to that moment in your mind and re-experience that pleasure, because it's not gone. It's not finished like all the physical pleasures. And this is what the Rabbi Baal Shem Tov is teaching. Ikar tanug l'tzadik yeh me'Shabbat me'atzmo. That the real pleasure that the tzaddik has is the Shabbat itself. Me'esek Torah, from the learning of Torah, from the tefillah b'kedusha, and praying with purity, which of course means purity of mind and body. U'v'tara b'Shabbat, right? The purity of Shabbat itself. That I'm not being mutrad in Hebrew, I'm not being run down by the world. And the main reason that God gave us the Shabbat is so that we would have time to learn. And the rest of the world keeps on running. And the rest of the world keeps on running. That takes us out of Shabbat completely. One of the first times I kept Shabbat in LA, I walked out of the shul over there on La Brea Boulevard, and I was like, what's going on? Where's everybody going? I was amazed that the rest of the world wasn't in Shabbat. That's called a bubble. I was in the Shabbat bubble. And I walked out of the shul, and here's the rest of the world driving down the avenue, heading wherever they're heading, and it took me a few moments to get my feet, like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm in California now. I'm not in Shabbat per se as you would feel Shabbat in downtown Jerusalem, hopefully, or in Gush Etzion, or in Tzfat, or Tiberia, or any place where people are keeping Shabbat, that the spiritual cloud of Shabbat is there. And our sages taught Amrat Torah. This is an interesting teaching. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Zivu Gahad Yesh v'Shabbat Shema. I have one partner, God said. Now Zivug is the lashon like a love partner, but we don't need to take that too far to understand. We're talking about spiritual power. Zivu Gahad Yesh li Shabbat Shema. I have a partner, and it's Shabbat. Now, when you're infinite, how do you reveal yourself? When you're infinite, how do you give pleasure to beings that just want to run after their pursuit of this world? You make them stop. And then you can reveal yourself in the rest itself, in the pleasure itself. In resting on Shabbat, I can discover something more. But as long as my mind is running after the next thing I need to do, or the next conversation I need to have, or the next problem I have to deal with, I'm not going to have time to stop and contemplate the big picture, which is the time of Shabbat. And Shabbat, of course, is one of God's divine names. So we're going to be doing a series on Kabbalah after Tisha B'Av near Ali. No, it might be sooner. Trying to preparing things and getting ready for new masterclass series on our Patreon account that all of you, of course, are invited to. We're going to be learning some basic ideas of Kabbalah, but they're not so basic. And one of them is this idea of God's names and how they work and what they're supposed to do. And one of his names is Shabbat. That's why we don't say Shabbat Shalom in the mikveh when people are not dressed. And now we can understand the verse better. They will enjoy your kingship, those who keep Shabbat, and call it a pleasure. So it's an interesting verse. There's several aspects happening at once. There's the Yismachu b'malchutcha. I am happy that he is king and nobody else. Not the king of England or the king of America or the king of Indonesia. I'm happy with my king, the Malchei Melech Malchei Amlachim. Right? So you have to have some joy in the fact that God is king. And if you don't, you might be in the wrong religion. And the next level is Shomrei Shabbat. That by keeping Shabbat, I'm going to have access to that joy in the king. Because the king is coming out on Shabbat. When the king comes out of his palace, everybody's waiting outside. They want to see this. This big moment when the king shows himself to the nation. That's Shomrei Shabbat. Get to have that joy of the king. And the next level is Korei Oneg. And they call out the pleasure. What a pleasure Shabbat is. Now you can hear that a lot in religious communities or where people keeping Shabbat. There's and that's like, well, I guess that we'd call that sublingual communication. It's not exactly a word, but it really gives us a sense of Korei Oneg. You're calling it a pleasure. You're calling Shabbat. This is what I'm here for. I need this one day of the week to stop the planet from its mad turn, and to stop my life from all the worries that are coming in my inbox. Umahu oneg amiti. And what is the true pleasure? Laneg bo et Shabbat, to experience the pleasure of Shabbat, yisba'u v'tangu mituvecha, to have satisfaction and pleasure from your goodness. So that's a pretty big word, good, God's goodness. That's a pretty broad phrase. What is God's goodness? You know, I love those people that say, oh, well, what's good for you is not good for me, so don't tell me what to do. It's really just a defense mechanism that they don't want to identify with you. If I say, I just love Shabbat, I sit down in the back porch and open a sefer and drink a tea and take a deep breath and everything's okay in the world for at least a little while. Another person says, nah, what kind of good is that? You know, I'm going to turn on the TV and watch the NBA finals and drink my beer and smoke my cigarette and et cetera, et cetera. That's his good. But you know, they're not so far off. It's just a matter of what the body's demanding. But Shabbat kind of closes down some of these things so that I can experience a higher pleasure. Okay, have your beer, have your wine, whatever you need on Shabbat. But the cigarette, the other things that people take, come on. That's nothing compared to the pleasure of Shabbat. And people that trade that for that are making a bad business deal with the Yetzer Hara. You know, you're giving a $5 bill and you're getting back a $1 bill. But it's really more than 5 to 1. Now, Al Yedei Torah, when you open that Torah, Shemitzvah, listen to this is very important. Klal about pleasure, and the pleasure of Torah. That in the nature of the Torah, shekol ma she'adam sover mimeno biyoter yesh lo ta'anug yoter. That the more that a person has satisfaction from the Torah, the more pleasure he gets. Remember, satisfaction is a sense of being full, and pleasure is like that lifting of the mind to a new consciousness, to new perception, to new awareness of the oneness. But I first have some satisfaction before I can see the amazing oneness that underlies the entire creation. That's in the nature of the Torah. Whereas, as we said before, whether you're getting pleasure from salmon or whatever else of the physical world, when it's gone, it's gone. But here, it's expansive. It's taking us to a new level. This is what's written, Nechmadi mizahav mipaz rav. In the Shabbat, the Torah is more pleasurable than great, abundant gold. And then in the Gemara lists for us 5 types of gold. It seems to me that on the physical level, there are probably different refinements of gold. Any gold miner will know that. But paz is considered the highest level of gold. And zahav is another level. And there's a couple others. But that's the comparison for Torah itself. Perush divrei Torah shenechmadim mizahav mipaz rav ki zahav paz afal gav yesh ta'anug la'adam mehem. Even though with real gold, people do have a certain pleasure from them, whether, especially if you own it, more than you're looking at the jewelry in the window at Tiffany's. But nonetheless, there's pleasure in just looking at gold. It's a beautiful substance. It shines. The color is special. Okay, fine. The artisans do wonderful things with gold. That's a certain type of pleasure a person does have. We're not denying that. Nevertheless, yes, he's saron she'ein behem svi'ah, but there's a problem. With that pleasure of gold, you don't get the satisfaction, that sense of being filled. Umasha'ain kain divrei Torah, which is not the case with the Torah. I remember seeing a brief video of President Trump's living room in Trump Tower over there. And it was pointing out how this is made of gold and that's made of gold and the faucet's gold and the bed frame's gold, all this gold everywhere. I'm like, well, how far does that go? How much pleasure can you get before you forget it's gold? And even if you look at it's gold, I want to wipe my dirty hands on it. What's the deal over here? I'm not criticizing Mr. Trump because there's whole tribes in Africa that they worship gold, literally. Check it out on National Geographic. I mean, amazing amounts of gold. Gold dust in their hair and gold dust flecked on their bodies. Everywhere. How far does it go? What kind of pleasure is that? What is this, Halloween? Every day I wear a gold costume? Is that pleasure? No. The pleasure is the new ideas of the Torah going into my mind and opening up my consciousness. That's pleasure. And that's the Siviyah. Because the mind opens, you receive new light. When you receive new light, you receive satisfaction. But the gold's not going to give you satisfaction. I don't care how much you eat or how much you plaster on the wall. The Torah is not like that. The Torah is sweet. Like, and nofet sufim is another type of honey. It's a refined type. Right? But after these physical things, you don't have more pleasure. Whereas in the Torah, you do. And when you go over it again, you have more pleasure. And review it, and it triggers a little memory in your mind. And that trigger in your memory, Rabbi Nachman teaches us, memory is above nature. The nature of nature is to forget. So if you forget things, take it easy on yourself. It's the nature of the way we're built. The brain itself forgets things. However, memory is above nature. The idea of always having recall. And that's why, by the way, when the Jews got the Torah at Mount Sinai, they got their memories back. Complete memory. And that's why they lost it when the golden calf, right, was made. Oh, yeah, what we've gone through. Pen tisabenu v'haketao ma she'en kein b'Torah. And then, there is this pleasure, and then afterwards, it's gone. And he uses a Goss word for it's gone. It's like you throw it up. Ma she'en kein b'Torah, which is not the Torah, ki na'im ki tishmerem bebitenecha. It's Torah is pleasurable, the Pasuk says, because, this is from Mishlei, because you guard them, the Shlomo Melech says, in your stomach, which is an interesting idea. I've never heard that before. That the stomach is another place where you can keep the Torah. Because the stomach is related to a place of satisfaction. So, it's so close to us. We just have to do a tiny bit of work. Open that book. Sit down. Turn off the radio. Turn off the headphones. Turn off the phone itself. And open a book. And read the words. And it's easy. I know it's easy for me to sit here and say this. But anything that I read or learn with you is something I had to go through. Or I couldn't open my mouth. And I remember when I didn't open the books. And I remember when I didn't even know that they existed. And I remember when I didn't know Hebrew. And that was very frustrating. But when you learn the Torah in Hebrew, it's another experience. And not everybody has that gift. And it's something we have to work for and pray for. But when you learn these words, like the words of King Solomon in Hebrew, it's like, wow. They radiate from the past. The wisdom that was emanating through the king. And through King David in Tehillim. King David was just a filter for the Shekhinah. And so was King Solomon. And so are you when you find out the truth of your true soul. So God should bless us all with the Holy Shabbat, purify ourselves to feel that presence within us, and know that we're not getting a bad deal with the Torah and with Shabbat. We just have to trim the excess of this physical world, and then you create something beautiful. Have a great Shabbat. We'll see you next week on Patreon. God bless. All the best.